Good evening, everyone. It is October 14th, mid-evening on a Monday, and here you see I've barricaded myself in after struggling near-death experiences periodically throughout my day from those who are hell-bent on trying to torture me to death with electrochemical weapons simply because I won't acquiesce to their horrible, corrupt, despotic evil. So meanwhile, I huddle in a fetal position most of the hours of my day, and then for a while I get up and try to read. And, reading this beautiful book, Bridge of Sighs, by this wonderful, wonderful author, Richard Russo, helps me escape for a little while. And, I hold the book open with one hand and clench a fist in the other hand against the chemical weapons assault that is nonstop for me right now. And why do you say barricade the door when there's a deadbolt there? Because these are chemical weapons terrorists, and they might just be able to just crack the door open and spray some sort of noxious chemical through the door that won't quite penetrate through a solid wall. So I have contrived this elaborate blockade so that they can't even crack the door, because they've snuck in before. They have a key, and I can't do anything about that. Okay, so anyway, here I am. Let me try to find... so here I am in the story, and this woman who's dedicated her life to family for so many years just needs to get away and learned how to live with herself and by herself, and she misses the memory of her mother, and so she goes back to this area where her mother was living in this nutty condominium complex, and the town is now decimated, and all signs of wealth have left, and it's an extremely impoverished zone, and she's having extremely mixed feelings about having come back there and rented a room in the old building where she would spend the summers with her mother. And both her and her mother were artists, and so she decides to try to have some sort of reconciliation with the overwhelm and seeing the despair and the falling down into impoverishment of this home away from home with her mother she used to have. And so I'm reading up to page 584 to 586 in the Bridge of Sighs. Locating the sketch pad and the big sleeve on the side of her suitcase, she left the Sundry Gardens and didn't realize she was heading back to the Arms until she was halfway across the street. At this early hour, the courtyard was oddly peaceful, with only the sounds of sleepy children and televisions on low leaking out the open doors and windows. A low cinder block wall surrounded what had been the swimming pool. So Sarah sat down there and opened her pad to a fresh page. She did a quick sketch of the window box outside her mother's former apartment and felt a little better, if no less foolish, for the effort. She did a couple more sketches on the same page, then got up and moved down the wall to frame the window box within the rusty swing set. That somehow made both objects more interesting. It might be the basis for a painting later when she returned home, if she returned. You want the LIRR, the woman had insisted. She started a new page. She'd only been there for half an hour, but could feel in her blood and busy hand that she was, well, getting warmer. Again, the child's game. Was she losing her mind? Wasn't it enough to just sit here and let her pen fly over the rough paper instead of indulging a fantasy that had already proved futile? On the other hand, what could she lose as long as she acknowledged that it was a fantasy? And she's referring to earlier on, she hadn't planned to come back to her mother's home and was going to go to New York and have a very sort of decadent week there. And then just at the last minute, she took another train, and she had been referring to the sense of that child's game, when you hide something, and all the children know but you, and they keep saying you're getting warmer, 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 and then if you go away, colder, colder, colder. And so she had that sensation when she was riding the train of getting warmer back to her mother's place of living post-divorce. And then when she actually saw the impoverishment and the starkness, she could hear the children's voices in her head saying, colder, 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 you're totally frozen. But somehow when she got up the second morning of staying in that same complex that her mother had lived in with her sketch pad, she senses something, a warming. Sarah was only vaguely conscious of the passage of time, of doors opening and closing, of children emerging into the courtyard, of snatches of adult conversation. She doing down there? Same woman as the other day? She crazy. There was also the sound of a tricycle with big plastic wheels thumping over cracks in the pavement to the cadence of adult instructions, don't, 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 don't. Eventually, she became aware of someone watching her close by, and she turned and saw it was the lanky black girl who returned her smile the day before, the one who should have been in school. She was standing awkwardly on one leg, regarding the sketch pad and Sarah herself with a kind of terrible longing. "Can you teach me?" she said. Sarah started to say no, felt the word forming on her lips, and saw the girl accept her answer even before it was given and start to leave. Where had she seen that mixture of longing and immediate resignation before? "Of course I can," she said, though in truth she was none too sure what she meant. That drawing was a skill that could be taught, that she herself had been a teacher most of her adult life, that she could spend the rest of the morning showing the girl a few basics, maybe even go out and get her an inexpensive sketch pad and a starter pencil and pen set. Or was she suggesting the girl could actually learn, even in a place like this, if she really wanted to? "Really?" the girl said, not quite sure she'd heard right, her eyes now big and round. "Really?" That's what that mock boy had said, in exactly that same way. "Really? You would, with me?" In fact, she hadn't even said yes. What she'd said was that she'd ask her father, then warned him not to get his hopes up because she was never allowed to go out with boys. At the time, she thought she was being kind by allowing him to believe that the only impediment was her father, that she would have gone with him to the matinee if the choice had been hers, but it wasn't. It had been nothing to do with him personally. It wasn't that she didn't like him or that what he was proposing wasn't permitted because he was a Negro. He'd been expecting one kind of no, and she'd given him another, a no that had some yes in it. It didn't include the humiliation he'd expected, but a moment earlier, the look of yearning and surrender on his face was the same as the one on this girl's in the split second before Sarah changed her mind. How awful it must be, she thought, to ask for something you knew you'd be denied. How much courage it took to ask anyway, instead of just slinking away and adding this new refusal to the stew of countless others. "When?" the girl said, thinking perhaps this was where the no would come. Sarah turned to a fresh page in the sketchbook and motioned for her to sit down on the wall. "How about we start with that window box? The one by the blue door. The girl took the pad and balanced it on her knee like she'd seen Sarah do, then took the pen almost fearfully. Like this, Sarah said, showing her how to hold it. Don't worry about making a mistake. We're going to draw it over and over. What comes first? You're the one holding the pen. That means you get to decide. Sarah couldn't remember seeing anyone more terrified. Finally, the girl drew a tentative horizontal line and immediately looked up at her as if to ask if the time had come already to give up. Good, Sarah told her, but maybe you'd better tell me your name. It was Kayla.